Well, it's been quite a while since I've made a video about One Championship. As any longtime follower of mine would know, One Championship and I are not on great terms, with them having copyright struck me when I made a video about their poor financials, followed by me making another video about how signing with a promotion can be a career-ending choice for fighters, which then led to them blocking me on Twitter. And according to the rules of internet arguments, if you get blocked first, you're the winner. So I was willing to walk away from this whole spat with my W by decorating my channel banner with that badge of honor. I mean, name me another MMA YouTuber who's been blocked by the, quote, biggest martial arts organization in the world. A martial arts organization, by the way, that can't even get 17,000 views on Twitter for an announcement of one of their most anticipated title fights of the year, despite supposedly having over 1 million followers on the platform. And sure, I'd make fun of them from time to time on my community posts, but recently it was brought to my attention that One Championship had finally found a path to achieving profitability by the end of 2026, a full 15 years after it was founded. And what exactly is the plan that One Championship, a promotion that burned through over $500 million in capital to end up being Glory Kickboxing but for flyweights, have to achieve profitability? Well, it's quite simple. Sue Rodtang for tens of millions of dollars. Yes, Rodtang. You know, the guy who is One Championship's biggest homegrown star? The guy who they make all of the edits out of to boost their social media metrics for Nielsen to look good for investors? The guy who is literally scheduled to fight 2 weeks from when they announced the lawsuit. And he's not just fighting no one. He's fighting Takeru, One's biggest Japanese star, in Takeru's retirement fight, as the headliner of the first ever One Samurai event. And One is suing Rodtang for $17 million. And now, guess what? One has recently come out and said that the headliner for One Samurai will not only be Takeru's retirement fight, but Rodtang's final fight in One Championship. It's so easy to dunk on this joke of an organization. In today's video, we will be doing a comprehensive deep dive into One Championship and their CEO, Charity Sit-Yadong's recent catastrophic mismanagement of his company. First, we will be breaking down One's lawsuit against Rodtang, examining the facts, and figuring out why the hell they decided to sue the Iron Man just 2 weeks out from one of the most important fights of his career. Then, we will go over One's 2024 financials, which were released a few weeks ago, and looking at the good, the bad, and the hilariously ugly of it all. And spoiler alert, those financials do not look good. After that, we will discuss the departure of key talent like Adriano Moraes, as well as the shutting down of One's women's strawweight MMA division. And then, finally, we will be going over One canceling 2 tentpole events, those being One 174 and the One Denver show, and pivoting to a 100% focus on Japan in a last-ditch effort to survive through their new monthly One Samurai series. And this fact is further reinforced by One firing 3 senior management figures in Matt Hume, Rich Franklin, and John Sheeler, all 3 of whom were key figures in One's attempts to expand into the American market. And of course, I will explain why I believe that this attempt to aggressively enter the Japanese market will fail. But without further waiting, let's get into all of it. So starting off with the lawsuit, on April 15th, One Championship announced through their Thai social media that they would be launching legal proceedings against Rodtang, citing, quote, multiple breaches of contractual obligations and the, quote, dissemination of potentially misleading information and statements that may be considered defamatory. The legal proceedings are scheduled to happen in Thailand, Singapore, and Japan. Then, the next day, the CEO of One's Thailand subsidiary, President Jitana Astamgol, came out alongside their legal team to speak to journalists, where they made it clear that they would be suing Rodtang for 542 million Thai baht, or nearly 17 million USD in damages. However, Jitana also said that the bout with Takeru would be going ahead since One had not yet filed any charges in court, and that both Rodtang and One wanted the fight to go ahead. And I actually do believe One when they say this here, because they later posted on social media that the Takeru fight will be Rodtang's final fight in the promotion. So yeah, if One is marketing that fight like that, which, fun fact, is an interim title fight between a guy who is retiring and a guy who is leaving the promotion, I do have to believe that this fight will be going forward. However, what's interesting is the timing of this announcement against Rodtang. On March 25th of this year, Rodtang posted to Facebook that his contract with One Championship had come to an end and that he was now looking for new offers. However, One told the Bangkok Post that Rodtang remained under contract despite his claims. And then, in early April, Rodtang came out claiming that his signature had been forged for over 30 contracts, and that when Rodtang had his lawyer confront the individual who he suspected of forging the signatures, the man admitted to it. And according to the kickboxing and MMA journalist, Timothy Wheaton, whose article on the situation for Low Kick MMA I highly recommend checking out, by the way, from Rodtang saying he was no longer under contract to speaking out about forged signatures may be the basis for One Championship's defamation claims against Rodtang. However, that doesn't explain the timing, because why would One go after their biggest homegrown star 2 weeks before he headlines their inaugural One Samurai event in Japan? Well, this following fact may be the answer. According to the Bangkok Post and SNE Sports, Rodtang made it clear that he intended to visit the Crime Suppression Division of the police on April 14th, saying he had reached the limits of his patience and that the contract dispute he was having with One was a threat to the livelihood of his family. Rodtang also stated that he planned to address the media regarding the situation as he made his visit. So it seems to me that One made their intentions of starting a legal dispute with Rodtang public in order to prevent Rodtang from going to the Crime Suppression Division and addressing the media. And then, there's the sheer sum of money that Rodtang is going to be sued for. $17 million for defamation and breach of contract is absurd. Rodtang reportedly made around $493,000 for his first fight against Takeru at 172, and that's including a $50,000 performance bonus for getting a KO. And that purse was a career high. Like, that's the most Rodtang has ever gotten paid. And One is suing Rodtang for $17 million. And yes, I know that Rodtang has screwed over One multiple times in the past. He's missed weight a number of times, and most recently, he got a fight against Nango at 173 cancelled by saying he was ill after making weight. But there's no doubt that Rodtang was carrying One Championship for years. He was the face of One's Muay Thai division, which is their most popular product. Rodtang has done infinitely more good for One Championship than he has done harm, and no matter how bad the contract dispute is, or how bad the defamation is, it can't be $17 million worth of damage. And that's because, is the entirety of One even worth $17 million at this point? And right as I was finishing editing up this video, there has been an update to the situation. At a press conference hosted at Rodtang's gym, Rodtang and One Championship have seemed to have come to a sort of truce. One Championship is requesting that Rodtang, 1, issue a public apology for false statements and a complete retraction, 2, make no more false allegations, and 3, adhere to all terms of the existing agreement between them until a settlement can be agreed upon. And Rodtang has in turn requested to become a free agent after the Takeru fight, but One has not yet agreed. And since this is a rapidly changing legal situation, I will continue to keep you guys updated using my community posts. So, whether One Championship goes through with suing Rodtang for $17 million remains to be seen. And, speaking of money, let's now get into One Championship's financials. Now moving on to One's 2024 financials, as usual, they are absolutely terrible. However, they do show some signs of improvement from 2023, so I can give them some credit there. The revenue for One Championship Singapore, which is the subsidiary that owns all of their intellectual property and could be called the center of the organization, grew from around $68 million in 2023 to $93.2 million in 2024. And then their loss for the year shrunk from $90 million to $47 million, which is really good. However, that doesn't mean that One isn't screwed. In fact, there's something absolutely hilarious that is hidden in these financials that will absolutely blow your mind. Now, when you think of the term revenue, you think of, cash, right? But what if I were to tell you that that's not exactly the only way you can classify something as revenue? And here, I'm going to quote the explanation of what constitutes broadcasting revenue in one's financial statement from Ernst & Young. Quote, "The group produces live broadcasts of martial arts and esports events to broadcast partners across the world. License fees are collected from broadcast partners for the right to broadcast these events, and these rights are granted to broadcast the licensed program via transmission media for a defined period in a particular territory. The performance obligation is defined as the right to access intellectual property. Revenue is recorded at the fair value of cash and non-cash consideration received or promised from the customer. The fair value is measured as the earlier of the receipt of the non-cash consideration by the group or when or as the group satisfies its performance obligations. If an entity is unable to reasonably estimate the fair value of the non-cash consideration, it should measure the consideration indirectly by reference to the standalone selling price of the goods or services promised to the customer in exchange for the consideration. Revenue related to broadcasting rights is recognized over the rights period measured based on the pattern of broadcasting of the contractual events." So, notice how I emphasize the term non-cash consideration there, and how the value of these, quote, non-cash considerations are estimated and then classified as broadcasting revenue. Now, guess how much of one championship's broadcasting revenue was cash versus non-cash? Just guess. Well, as it says here on page 36 of their financial statement, out of the $75.8 million of broadcasting revenue they reported, 93% of it was non-cash considerations. That means that out of the $75.8 million, only $5.3 million of it was actual cash revenue. The non-cash considerations mainly took the form of marketing plugs for one that the broadcasters would do in exchange for broadcasting one's events. These were barter transactions where the value of the non-cash considerations were estimated based on the advertising rates provided by the various broadcasters. So, to put that simply, let's say that there's an advertisement slot on Broadcaster A's platform that they typically sell for $10,000. One championship would give Broadcaster A the rights to broadcast one championship events, and then, in return, Broadcaster A would put on a one championship advertisement during the advertisement slot. And after the advertisement gets played, one championship writes down $10,000 in revenue on their balance sheets. It is also worth noting that out of their $14.2 million in sponsorship revenue, 22% of that was also non-cash, meaning the actual cash they received from sponsors amounted to $11 million. So, if we add together all of the streams of cash revenue, the $5.3 million from broadcasting, the $11 million from sponsorships, the $2.3 million from digital platforms, which is stuff like YouTube AdSense, the $500,000 from merchandise, and a pitiful $300,000 from ticketing, you get this. Even though one technically reported $93.2 million in revenue, only $19.4 million of it was actual cash. So now, if you look at it that way, the numbers look a lot worse now, don't they? And now, let's go look at the ticketing revenue again, because there's some really suspicious stuff going on there as well. In 2024, the MMA journalist John S. Nash, whose content I highly recommend, by the way, if you like the finances behind all of MMA, he reported that 168 in Denver had a total gate of $1.28 million, having sold 8,583 tickets. However, that number doesn't make any sense, since the net ticketing revenue in 2024 was only $304,000. In regards to this magically disappearing revenue, John S. Nash hypothesizes that either A, one championship used a third-party broker to purchase their own tickets at inflated prices, or B, they conducted that business under a business entity which was then later absorbed by Group 1 Holdings in the Cayman Islands, which is a country where companies don't need to disclose their financials. Either way, it's incredibly suspect. And when you compare all of these numbers to one's biggest Asian competitor, Rizin, the financials become even more pathetic by comparison. In 2024, Rizin put on Super Rizin 3, which was later announced to have sold 420,117 pay-per-views. Since the pay-per-views for Super Rizin 3 were 6,500 yen, or $41 each, we can estimate that Super Rising 3 by itself grossed around $17.2 million in cash revenue from pay-per-view alone. And that doesn't include the gate, where 48,117 people attended, with the cheapest tickets costing 16,500 yen or $107. So even if everybody attended with the cheapest tickets possible, which isn't the case by the way, the gate would be well over $5 million. Add that together with the $17.2 million in cash from the pay-per-view revenue, and you get $22.2 million in cash revenue for Super Rising 3 alone, which surpasses the entirety of One Championship's cash revenue in 2024 from all operations, from ticketing to broadcasting to merchandise to sponsorships, and that is an extreme lowball because we aren't even factoring in more expensive tickets or sponsorship revenue. One Championship, despite having managed to raise over $500 million in capital from investors like the Qatari Investment Agency and Guggenheim Investments, has managed to squander almost all of it. What an absolute failure. Now, moving on to the departure of key talent from One Championship, let's talk about how it's looking more and more like One Championship will be shutting down their MMA divisions. Starting off with the big one though, as you're likely aware if you're a hardcore MMA fan, the former One Championship flyweight champion and the only man to ever KO Demetrius Johnson, Adriano Moraes, has left the organization and is now competing against Muhammad Mokaev on the undercard of Rousey vs. Gina Carano. Now, I first want to say congratulations to Moraes for making it out of One Championship's contract hell, which, when you take into consideration how the whole Rodtang dispute went down, is a video that is aged incredibly well. And as I spoke about in my video on the Netflix card, Adriano Moraes will have been out of action for over a year by the time he fights Mokaev. And that is because One Championship infamously has a 1-year matching clause in their contracts where, if a fighter fights out their contract, they automatically enter a period where one can match any offer from another organization and keep a fighter. This clause kept Adriano Moraes out of action for over a year when he was 35, at the very tail end of his prime. And it's not like one were paying him all that much either. In fact, his contract for one of his fights against Demetrius Johnson got leaked, and it was revealed that he was getting $50K to show and $50K to win in a 5-round title fight against the GOAT of his division. And then there's also how One Championship recently shut down their women's strawweight division and released the fighters, including the champion Zhang Jingyang. And guys, if you think One Championship screwed over Renier de Ridder, Reese McLaren, and Adriano Moraes, I can conclusively say that they absolutely destroyed Zhang's career. From 2022 to her release from her contract in 2026, Zhang Jingyang was only given a single MMA fight by One Championship despite being a reigning and multiple-time defending champion. And guess what? That fight was a non-title bout down a weight class. And the only other fight she got was a weird custom rules bout at a catchweight. Zhang Jingyang is now scheduled to make her UFC debut against Angela Hill, but she is now 38 years old. Imagine, now, if she could have signed with the UFC back in 2022 when she was 34. She could have had a title run. But no, One kept her locked in contract hell, probably because they needed to be able to show their investors that they have all of these MMA fighters under contract since the investors want MMA, not Muay Thai and kickboxing because MMA is what is profitable in the big Western markets. But anyways, that's enough talk about One Championship's contract hell for right now, so let's now move on to their last-ditch effort to survive by putting all of their eggs in the Japanese basket. If you're looking at the chapters on YouTube, you would see that I have this titled One Championship's Expansion into Japan. And I have all those quotation marks around expansion because the proper term is retreat. And let me explain why. First off, One Championship very quietly canceled 2 temple events for 2026 in One 174 and One Denver, with the Denver event getting postponed multiple times until they finally officially canceled it. And while One 174 never had an official location announced before its cancellation, there were rumors flying around here and there that it might have taken place in Qatar, or Qatar. I don't know how to pronounce it. Either way, what is very apparent is that One's attempts of carving out its own little slice of the US or Middle Eastern markets has failed abysmally. And this fact is further hammered home by the recently announced departure of Vice President Rich Franklin, Senior Vice President of Competition Matt Hume, and COO John Sheeler, all of whom are Americans. It is also worth noting that Rich Franklin is a former UFC fighter, and Matt Hume was Demetrius Johnson's head coach. So the departure of these two figures could be taken as another sign that ONE's MMA divisions may be downsized even more very soon. Another sign of ONE retreating from the West is the creation of the new ONE Inner Circle subscription package, which is where you can pay $10 a month to join their superfan club. Now, this is a step in the right direction for profitability, but you can't tell me with a straight face that people are going to be paying $10 a month to watch stuff like Anatoly Malikin versus Rug 2. ONE seems to have built this new service in anticipation of their Amazon Prime deal not being renewed at the end of this year, albeit that remains to be seen. And furthermore, apparently, ONE Samurai in the West is going to be a traditional pay-per-view, which, guess what, means that it's just going to get streamed and pirated, even if it gets, watched at all. And on the other hand, ONE Championship and their CEO, Charity Sityodong, have announced that they will be doing monthly, and I repeat, monthly events in Japan branded ONE Samurai, which will be streamed on the subscription service Unext without any additional charge. And Unext doesn't just have one. No, they have the UFC, Rizin, the PFL, and Deep all on there as well. So it's not like the Japanese fans will be subscribing to Unext just to watch ONE Samurai shows. In order to fill these cards up, ONE has announced partnerships with regional MMA promotions like Shudo and Pancrase, and the kickboxing promotions Shootboxing, Rise, and Knockout. However, as the Japanese journalist John Saito noted, the representatives for those organizations did not attend the press conference where Charity announced the partnership. And I mean, Pancrase is a UFC Fight Pass promotion, so I can tell you where their true loyalties lie there. And when it comes to these partnerships, it's important to note who is missing. Notably, the MMA promotion Deep, the kickboxing promotion K1, and most importantly, Rizin are all not there. And now, ONE Championship has already managed to poach almost all of K1's top talent, like Takeru, Masaaki Noriri, and Yuki Oza, so not having the partnership with K1 isn't that big of a deal. But not having access to fighters from Deep and Rizin will be a huge hindrance to their MMA divisions, because those are the two shows that the majority of Japanese fans watch and care about. And here's the thing. The CEO of Rizin, President Nobuyuki Sakakibara, has said that he is willing to work with any organization, and that includes ONE Championship. Heck, he has even gone on air in the past, saying that when he had Tenshin Nasukawa under contract, he would have let Tenshin go to ONE. And he's not lying, because he really is willing to work with everybody. Most notably, he let Yuri Prohaska, Kai Asakura, Manel Cape, and Kyoji Horiguchi all go to the UFC when they asked to, and even worked with Dana White to help promote them on their way there. He's also recently lent Naoki Inoue, the former Rizin Bantamweight champion, to the PFL to help draw Japanese viewers to their Brussels card. Sakakibara does all of this without being antagonistic towards other promotions or restricting his fighters, and it's worked quite well for him so far. However, Sakakibara has also made it clear that he recognizes ONE Samurai for what it is, an attempt to steal market share from Rizin. When Nobuyuki Sakakibara was interviewed about ONE at the post-fight press conference for Rizin 52, he stated, quote, "Having failed in every other market in the world, they are now looking for a final path to survive in the Japanese market that we have cultivated over the past 10 years, and that's why they are up for the challenge." And when he was asked about whether ONE doing events every month in Japan would be an issue for Rizin, Sakakibara said, quote, "It's a world of free competition. I'm sure they will work hard to become an organization that is loved by the Japanese people. We also want to take on the challenge of spreading the worldview we have created in Rizin to Asia and the rest of the world more than ever before. I think we are competitors in that sense as well." And here's the thing. When Sakakibara says that he was the one who cultivated the Japanese market, he's not lying. And that's not just in regards to Rizin. In addition to having created Pride back in the day and running Rizin today, Sakakibara was the lead promoter and organizer for The Match, a kickboxing event that was headlined by Tenshin Nasukawa versus Takeru in 2022. Like Naoya Inoue versus Junto Nakatani has recently done, The Match sold out the Tokyo Dome, which has a max capacity of 55,000 by the way, and sold around 500,000 pay-per-views in Japan alone. Takeru, who is one's biggest Japanese star, had his biggest fight ever promoted by Sakakibara. In contrast, 1172, which was Takeru's first fight against Rodtang, had an attendance of 15,000 at the Saitama Super Arena. For reference, when Rizin held two events at the same venue in the same year, they had an attendance of 43,965 and 45,043. And let's be honest about one's roster. Besides Rodtang, who they just sued, they don't have any real homegrown stars. Takeru, Masaki Noriri, Rukia Ampo, and Yuki Oza are all guys who built their names in K1 and then came to one championship afterwards. And in Ampo's case, he got a big boost in popularity out of doing exhibition fights in Mikura Asaka's Breaking Down and Rizin, where he famously fought Manny Pacquiao. And that's why I can confidently say that One Samurai and One Championship's attempt to dent the Japanese market are doomed. Not only are they going to be losing Rodtang and Takeru after their inaugural event, but they need the wider Japanese combat sports ecosystem to give them stars to poach. All of their biggest Japanese draws are guys who built their names outside of One, and the only way One can continue to get them is by consistently offering them a bigger purse. And sure, that will work in the short run. I mean, One is offering the biggest bonuses ever for their One Samurai events. But if you increase fighter pay, you increase your expenses. And that's not something that is sustainable in the long run because One has burned through most of the capital it has raised. And besides, just think about it logically. If you're a Japanese fan, would you want to support a Singapore-based fight promotion funded by the Qataris that have a shady holding company in the Cayman Islands and is run by a guy who has a habit of dissing fighters and holding them in contract hell? A promotion that has managed to develop a single star from scratch throughout its 15 years in existence and then proceeded to sue him for $17 million. Or would you like to pay to see the domestic promotion that is run by the man who created Pride, helped to promote the match, and built up stars like Kyoji Horiguchi, Yuri Prohaska, and the Asakura brothers, and is now working on creating the next generation of fighters by building up prospects like the 20-year-old Kyoma Akimoto, who brutally KO'd Patchy Mix with soccer kicks? The gap in the talent as MMA promoters between Sakakibara and Charity Satyadang is bigger than One Championship's cumulative financial losses. I think that the answer is pretty obvious from a Japanese fan's perspective. And to close this video out, I'll just say this. Rizin has kickboxing fights and 4-ounce Muay Thai fights sometimes. They're not that common, but they do happen. Who knows? Maybe Rizin is going to end up poaching Rodtang and have him headline Rizin Thailand in an MMA bout against Mirakota. And now, that's a fight I can guarantee will sell more than any One Championship event at Lumpini Stadium, where, they're handing out free tickets anyways. And yes, I am well aware that One Championship has done wonders when it comes to increasing the pay of Thai fighters fighting Muay Thai in Thailand. However, none of that growth is sustainable, and that's because they're funding that increase in fighter pay for the Thai fighters using the exorbitant amount of capital they raised. As we saw in the breakdown of their revenue, almost all of it takes the form of non-cash considerations, which means that they aren't paying fighters with money from ticket sales or broadcasting fees that are actually generated by their events. Instead, One has artificially inflated fighter pay with foreign capital, which is great for the Thais, but it's terrible from a business standpoint. And that's why I can conclusively say that One Championship has been catastrophically mismanaged. But anyways, that's the end of this extensive and in-depth demolition of One Championship. Goodbye.